Hallo?
So good morning, everyone. This is the technical check-in. So if you don't hear anything, don't be worried. We don't have a sound on at the moment, but be patient. We will start 15 minutes past 9. So we have still some time for technical check-in. So this is the technical check-in. If you don't hear anything, don't be worried. There is no sound on right now, but we start 9:15. This is the technical check-in, so the seminar will start in 5 minutes. Good morning to all of you, and a warm welcome to this seminar on sustainable transport in Greater Copenhagen. My name is John Hultén, and I am the director of K2, the Swedish Knowledge Center for Public Transport. I will be moderating today's event. I think most of us by now is rather experienced in web meeting and video conferences, but I still want to remind you all to mute your microphones. Today we have the luxury of having a technical support. Rebecca will assist us with the technology during the day. Assisting us is also Johan Edgren from the city of Malmö. He will keep an eye on the chat function. So he will be the one who picks up questions, comments, reflections from the chat and posts them to the speakers. We have some 65 people who have signed up for this seminar, representing universities, research institutions, municipalities, regions, state agencies, other organizations, private companies. And I think this shows that there is a great interest for learning more about sustainable transport, and not least how this can be utilized and help develop the Greater Copenhagen region. I think there is great potential for more interaction between researchers and practitioners, and there are a lot to offer from these interactions. And I think today's event is a great opportunity to learn more and to interact. So I wanted to urge you all not only to listen, but also to be active and interact with us using the chat function. I want to inform you that today's event will be recorded so that you know that. And the program consists of 4 presentations from researchers, and there will be a break in between after the 2 first of them. But before we dive into these 4 very exciting presentations, I want to give the word to Joe Jensen from Region Huvudstaden. Joe will make an introduction to the project, which in this seminar, in the context which this seminar takes place. So please, Joe, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, John. And I'll try to see if I can, I cannot start the video, but I can show you a presentation. So I will do that. I hope everybody is seeing my screen right now. Nevertheless, my name is Joe Jensen, and I'm an employee at the capital region of Denmark. And I'm working in this project called a coherent transport system in Greater Copenhagen. And I am to give a very short introduction to this project so you can see a little about the context in which the seminar is to be seen. So, first of all, a little about the project. Yes, it's called a coherent transport system in Greater Copenhagen. It's founded by, or financed by this Interreg program called Øresund, Kattegat and Skagerrak. And it's a 3-year project, and we have 10 partners. So 3 regions, 5 municipalities, and the 2 universities that are going to give presentations today. So the project originated from what we call the traffic charter, and the traffic charter is like this political vision paper on how the Greater Copenhagen Corporation, which is a corporation between 4 regions and 86 municipalities, how we are to work with questions related to transport, infrastructure, and mobility. And in this project, we are looking into international accessibility through fixed links, the airport, and so on. We also look into how to improve the internal mobility of the region or metropole. And lastly, we are also looking into green mobility overall. The project in itself consists of 3 work packages. So we have 1 work package about strategical scenarios for the train traffic, where we try to look into the year of 2050, making a system plan, analyzing what consequences it will have for the train traffic in Greater Copenhagen if we have new fixed links across Øresund, a fixed link to Femern, and increasement of the airport, and so on. And work package 2 is about the coherent public transport system, more concretely looking into how we can make it easier for the users of public transport to cross Øresund, with a specific focus on ticketing systems and traffic information and so on. And lastly, we have the work package 3, future mobility, which is about both fossil-free fuels and infrastructure, and a better utilization of new and existing infrastructure. So how can future mobility solutions improve the way we use the existing infrastructure and the infrastructure we are planning to implement in the coming decades? So today's presentations will mainly concern work package 2 and 3, and universities and those who are going to give presentations has been involved in the work throughout these 2 work packages. And lastly, I just want to say, on behalf of the project, thank you very much for everybody who's attending, and thank you for those who are going to give presentations. We are looking very much forward to hear what you have to say and present for us. And that was what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Joe. And I just want to say a thing to the technical assistant that I can't show my video, but maybe you can help me with that. And I think it's all should be possible also for the speakers to show their videos at the same time as they speak. But let's see if the technical assistants can help us with that. Thank you very much, Joe, for introducing us to the project. And without further ado, I think we should go into the first of our 4 research presentations. And I'm very happy to introduce Andres Valderrama and Morten Elle, both associate professors at the Department of Planning at Ålborgs University. And they both do research in sustainability transitions in mobility. And they will talk about transitioning to a sustainable transport system for Greater Copenhagen 2050. Most welcome, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me. I'm starting to share my presentation. I hope everybody can see it. I would like to have some feedback. Are you hearing me?
We can hear you. Please go
Good.
on.
So I'm going to start. So thanks, John, for the introduction, and thanks the organizers of the mini conference, particularly Joe, Sandrina, and Johan, that for the setting the whole process into motion. Our theoretical approach is that of sustainability transitions. The central aim of transitions research, as stated in this excerpt, is to conceptualize and explain how radical changes come about in the way societal functions are fulfilled, which is the only way we can tackle the grand challenges we stand before in terms of sustainability. So we're talking about long-term radical changes. And today we are going to concentrate on the societal function of passenger mobility in 3 steps. 1, with some arguments as to why we should leave the car system behind, which is the current dominant mode of transportation in Greater Copenhagen. Then briefly referring to another transition to highlight what we as users are willing to give up when we change from one system to another. And finally, making some suggestions as to how a sustainable and coherent mobility system for Greater Copenhagen could be developed. Why leave the car system behind? I'm going to rehearse some arguments we have been working on. The first one is because it is based in a standard engine design, which is extremely inefficient. A combustion engine at best converts 25% of the energy of the fuel into movement, including the movement part, moving the parts of the engine itself and the transmission and the movement of the vehicle. The rest, 75% and even more, is converted into heat. So by output, a combustion engine car is a heat engine. Now, the best efficiency, or at least the least inefficiency, is achieved in speeds between 50 and 80 kilometers per hour. Below 50, the inefficiency is even bigger, and above 80, it depends on the aerodynamic design of the car. But the point is that this design has two important consequences for the future. One is that replacing fossil fuels with any other fuel, like for instance, biofuels, or sorry, I'm going to start this. Replacing gasoline or fossil fuels with biofuels or any other fuel is going to preserve this distribution of inefficiency. Even hydrogen is going to be quite inefficient as well. But the graph also shows that this distribution of inefficiency across speeds will also be inherited in electric vehicles if we don't redesign radically what an electric vehicles is in terms of size, capacity, and configuration. Cars, as we conceive them today, they use a lot of space, and there's a lot of research on parking. But what this graph shows is what cars use when they are moving, the amount of space they use when they are moving. And what the graph shows is that the optimal use of space for cars and other vehicles is at 30 kilometers per hour, okay? This supports the idea that limiting speeds in the city for vehicles to 30 kilometers per hour will also have a positive impact in the optimization of road capacity. And it shows also how vehicle designs, which are optimal between 50 and 80 kilometers per hour, are not compatible with space use optimization. Combustion engine cars consume also too many resources in terms of life cycle, from a life cycle point of view. So you can see in this graph how diesel cars and hybrid cars just improve marginally in terms of resource use. And electric cars perform a lot better and could perform even better if they became smaller, lighter, and designed for lower speeds. This has also been well researched from an energy consumption point of view. It has been well researched that non-motorized modes of transport are the ones consuming less energy, and that public transport comes next. Perhaps this kind of knowledge should be taken seriously for the development of the next transportation system. Road construction is paradoxically conceived as good for the economy, both in times of economic success and in times of economic crisis. Mattioli and colleagues in this paper, which is a great paper, analyze how road construction appeals to almost all political inclinations in political inclinations. They also argue that the standardization of vehicles is a requirement for any country producing vehicles to reach as big a market as possible. And finally, that car making companies have become too big to fail. And we might be experiencing some difficulties in the transition because of that. And finally, the economic evaluation tools we use, normally cost-benefit analysis, overvalue time, savings in pre and post evaluation of infrastructure projects. So this evaluation, well, I'm showing in this slide of 5 road projects in Denmark, show that the greatest value in terms of the projects is time savings. In the case, for instance, of the bridge between Sjælland and Funen, it's 264 million crowns out of a total of 2088. So in short, we have currently a transportation system that has 2 core elements Time minimization for transport is the main objective, and it becomes the criteria to judge any transport mode. And you see often in the media how they compare car to public transport to cycling, and car is always winning because it's the one that produces more time savings overall. And the second element of this paradigm is the design of the car. So this is that what weighs more in the current transportation paradigm. Even though the cars are incredibly inefficient in terms of energy conversion and optimal use of resources, both from an LCA point of view and from an operations point of view. So now, what can we learn as users and decision makers from other transitions? And I present this reflection because I've been to some public hearings where there's always like, where can we learn from? And there's always this reference to smoking. And I think that's a poor example. I think that a better example is mobile phones. So this graph is a graph of global sales of mobiles and smartphones by operational system. So the gray line is Symbian, which was the operational system of Nokia telephones. And the other two is iPhone, iOS, and Android, which are the ones used by current smartphones. In 2007, the first smartphones came out, but Nokia did not change its marketing strategy. They said, they were the dominant company in the world on mobile telephones. They assumed that users wanted signal stability for talking on the phone instead of access to internet services. And for a while they were right. Up to 2010, their market kept growing. So there was no reason to change strategy, even though they had actually developed smartphones in the company. Actually, in the company, in the building when Morten and I, in the Ålborgs University Copenhagen campus, is housed today, that was Nokia software division when Nokia was a big company. So we know a little bit from colleagues that worked there before. So they didn't change the strategy. But as in any transition, and you can see at the end of 2010, the market for Nokia telephones still growing. As in any transition, all technologies have a last boom just before they die. And in 2011 became the breakout year where Nokia began to lose everything, especially the market was overtaken by Apple, Samsung, and the other smartphone producers. Now, remember that smartphones are heavier, bigger, and have a shorter battery life. And from the beginning and still today, they have signal problems, which Nokia telephones didn't have. But we as users, we're happy with the trade-off. So now we have, and this shows that the recent last growth, for instance, in global car sales, might be the last golden age of the car, and that users are willing to trade off things like range, availability, and speed if newer electric vehicle designs and new modes of transport become more convenient. This to counteract from another example, the idea that car is something we cannot rethink. Now, this idea that all technologies have a boom just before they die, it also applies to horse carriages. So in the US, up to 1910, horse carriages and the horse as a main means of transport experienced an unstoppable growth. And it was just after 1910 that growth was broken, as shown in this picture. By then, Henry Ford was innovating radically in car design and realizing that if he followed users' wishes, he would have to produce faster horses. Not surprisingly, if we learn from that, if we ask people today, including politicians, experts, and normal people, what they want today, they will normally answer that they want more of the same, but with an electric motor. Just like at the end of the 19th century, car designers were designing basically horseless carriages. So, in other words, we basically look today in 2020 as outdated if we think this is the best we can do. In other words, replacing conventional cars with electric cars is not going to solve the mobility problems we have. We just use too much resources for transportation, which in turn produce congestion in urban areas and mobility poverty in rural areas. No, so how should a coherent system look like? We claim that we should replace the core elements of the paradigm, move from a paradigm, which is shown in the upper left side, centered in time optimization and a specific car design, to a paradigm centered in what should weigh more in the new paradigm is people's mobility and the efficient use of resources from a life cycle perspective. More concretely, we should aim at changing at a regional scale. This can be achieved by adjusting the development of infrastructure to favor smaller vehicles and reduced speeds according to the geography, density, and availability, which means prioritizing non-motorized and assisted modes, and then public transport, and finally, if it's at all necessary, what we know today as private transportation. More concretely, we should aim at changing our model split as suggested by Projektet, where non-motorized modes are prioritized, especially in dense areas. Public transport becomes the backbone of the regional transportation, and private modes, improved private modes, cover the less dense areas. Geographically, this could look like this, and this is a proposal. The solid lines are inspired in plans and decisions, and the broken lines are suggestions that come from this modest exercise. Okay, but geographically, a region with a public transport backbone composed of trains, which are the red lines, and regional buses, which are the blue lines, and a regional cycle superhighway network that covers the whole region and supports improved assisted e-mobility for ranges longer than the ones we have today and for longer distances in combination with public transport. So the experience of superhighways in the capital region of Denmark has shown that people are willing to commute by bicycle distances above 15 kilometers, even 20 or 30 kilometers. So this with improved e-vehicles, this range could be even expanded. But for longer distances, 50, 100, and even so, there could be a combination trips. The third presentation today, Lydia Tinsu is going to provide more detail on the proposal and the research behind this proposal. What could happen, and this is based on the work of Robert Joseph Martin, which is a PhD student in our research group, in collaboration with Yaya Architects in Denmark. Streets in denser areas in some years, if we do this kind of changes, could change from being parking lots, which is basically the urban scape we get today in many places in the region, to being streets that create value as green areas, areas of community interaction, and areas of recreation, as well as supporting non-motorized mobility. Suburban areas like this one, the one showed in this slide, can be converted from, which are basically asphalt deserts, to areas that produce value also for housing. So this, if you see these carports in the picture to the left, if that's no longer necessary to shelter a car, it could be converted, for instance, in a tiny apartment for future students coming to study in the region and finding somewhere to live at available prices. And let's play this video. The point of this video being, in general, we could just stop wasting prime real estate areas in cities. This is central Copenhagen as it is and could be. In conclusion, these are some elements and reflections to support the creation of a coherent and sustainable transportation system for Greater Copenhagen during the next 3 decades. And it includes, to sum up, the following suggestions: at a macro regional level, to strengthen and expand the backbone of the future mobility system, train connections and regional bus connections. As Joe mentioned, this is being covered in the first 2 work packages of this project. At a meso-regional level, we can pay a particular attention to train stations, bus stops, park and ride, park and bike, and other nodes for modal change and continuity. This has been particularly not covered appropriately, especially in Denmark, and it's a prerequisite for any kind of mobility as a service system that really becomes competitive in terms of in front of other possibilities. And at a macro-regional level, to prioritize energy efficient modes like walking, cycling, e-cycling, and other emerging small e-vehicles and their coupling to the backbone. This might require reducing speeds overall for private modes, which we have evidence here makes sense from a technical and resource point of view. And happily, many cities are thinking along these lines, suggesting reducing speeds in denser areas to 30 kilometers per hour. To finish, on a more concrete, practical note, decisions we could start working on, for instance, harmonizing across the border the way we value transport projects. So Incentive has made this report for the project, and here makes visible how external costs for climate change and pollution are higher in Sweden than in Denmark. So and how in Denmark there is a significant value assigned to positive health benefits in transportation. So these aspects should be further developed and harmonized and made central in the shaping of the future transportation system in the region. So that was our presentation for today. I don't know if Morten wants to add something else. Otherwise, I think we are open to answering some questions.
I think you have said all the central points in this, and I hope that we'll have a lively discussion of this. And I beg the people listening to this having the image of the horseless carriage in their head when they are looking at these big new electric vehicles presented by the car company.
Thank you very much, Andres and Morten. And now my video is also functioning, so nice to see you all. Please use the chat function to post your questions or comments or reflections. I think there is a lot to be discussed about this very interesting presentation. So don't hesitate. Take the opportunity to post your questions. I start with a question on my own, if that's all right for you. I think you raised a number of interesting issues here, and it's also always when we talk about the future, it's there is a tendency that we very much look into the technical development, and the technology is supposed to help us being faster or better or more convenient or whatever. And this is something that we have been very much been used to think about for many decades. Would you say that this focus on technological development, if you agree, is that a problem, or what's your take on sort of the basic view of the future?
So theories of sustainability transitions belong to a range of theories that have a socio-technical take. it is a criticism of the idea that technological substitution delivers on the answers, that we also have new and better technologies that take over just because they are better, technically speaking. So this is a socio-technical approach in which there is the research agenda invites two covering aspects of that are normally not taken into account when thinking about the future. So geographical aspects, social aspects, and a systemic approach in general.
Okay, thank you. Johan, do we have any questions or comments from the chat?
Yeah, recently there is one question, and Peter is asking, how can we nudge people to use smaller cars and less often the car? For many people, cars are still a status symbol.
Yeah, that is a very interesting question. And the first answer is that from a transition perspective, we should look at a systemic change, right? Which also requires that we become more aware of the blind spots and the limitations of our own knowledge, okay? So happily, there's an emerging literature on these symbolic aspects that make the car such a, like an unquestionable thing in our lives. Alfred is going to present in a moment some of this research that deals with messaging. What kind of messages do people understand, and what kind of messages do people don't understand? And in Sweden, for instance, there has been an emerging wave of travel shaming, where people do not feel like it is defendable to travel by plane. So maybe some of the arguments I have presented today can also be used in what Alfred has suggested in one of his articles, in starting some campaigns of car shaming, okay? And in particular, these arguments that had to deal with technical aspects, okay? Because as Sarah Redshaw from Australia has shown in a recent article, the car is built on an idea of masculinity, which she characterizes as combustion masculinity. This explosive idea that is repeated in advertising and in Hollywood films. Think James Bond, things Mission Impossible, things the Bourne Ultimatum series. There's always these chases and this like combustion masculinity at play, right? But research in Sweden and in Norway, especially in Norway, where they have so much developed this electric vehicle market, has shown that this is starting to change to what Sarah Redshaw calls a hydraulic masculinity, where there is more awareness of the environment and more awareness of driving in a way which saves energy to cater for range anxiety and other things like that. So and these are just, I think, the tip of the iceberg, but there is definitely a number of social aspects, of symbolic aspects that we need to study more in depth in order to produce and support this kind of changes.
May I add?
Absolutely.
So it's also something about what we say as Andres is speaking about, this seeing the whole system, but also looking into, as a part of the whole system, these narratives about our mobility, the narratives and the kind of hoax surrounding the car, that it is giving you freedom and you travel fast. I tested when going to the university, and I have a rule. It takes me 1 hour and 10 minutes in a car by using public transport or going by bicycle. Sometimes I'm going faster by car, but then I'm getting stuck in all the queues. But this the fastness of the car is also kind of, yeah, sometimes you can drive very fast if you're not in an urban area. So it's also about the narratives. And if you go to Copenhagen, I think there are a number of areas in Copenhagen. If you try to flash your new car, you're like somebody coming from and not being brought very well up, because in some areas the car are not that status symbol any longer. If you flash your new bicycle, then you are on top of everything. But so the car is also changing status, and not that much of a status symbol in all places more.
Thank you very much. There might be some cultural differences in Sweden and Denmark. I don't know, but that's maybe something we can discuss further on in another occasion. We have more questions from the chat, Johan.
Yes, it's coming in, and now it's coming more and more. I had this one question was, how do you measure in Copenhagen today the sustainable and monitoring those changes? Maybe it's more for the Copenhagen community that's measuring, or are the university doing something, Andres?
Well, the problem we have is that there is no established system for measuring sustainability, right? So the established systems we have in place are to measure, like for instance, the traffic modeling systems that the road directorate use. They model passengers in public transport and cars. They have been improving and developing the system to also be able to see and measure people walking and cycling, but this is still not part of the system of measuring and producing knowledge about what is the state of the transportation system. So definitely we have there, and Copenhagen municipality is developing the Compass system, which is a model which is going to be more detailed and more cover more types of users, and it's going to be an activity-based model and not a tour-based model. But these developments are not, they are still tools to take a flash of what's going on. They are not tools to guide the future development of the system. So definitely there we have a task to do, and I suggest it should be a task that combines and improves that collaboration between Sweden and Denmark.
Okay, thank you. More? Do we have another question, Johan?
Yeah, we can have the last one. What would a systemic transformation mean for people's everyday life? And how do we make sure to make this social aspect into account?
Yeah, that's a very good question, Marie. Thank you very much. And I think we have a problem there in terms of involvement, because these discussions about the future of transportation, the future of the mobility system, are expert discussions. And the examples I showed by Robert Joseph Martin and his work with the Aya architects is to develop this visualization images that contrast what is now with what could be, in order to bring into the discussion that sense of everyday life and increase participation or involvement. So that's at the beginning of a road we should be exploring to make this discussion a more inclusive discussion.
Thank you very much for that. We still have 2 minutes for one more question, I think, Johan. We shouldn't be too harsh on the time schedule. There are a lot of interesting comments I can see in the chat, so please raise just the last question for the
all right, then
presenters.
I've been working at Ericsson before in the 90s, so the Nokia. In the Nokia case, we had a question from Victor. There was not coherence between Nokia's assumption and what the customers wanted, and it was for Ericsson as well. Which factors are essential in creating coherence between user needs and their assigned meanings to public transportations? And how do we vision the future? As you said, Andres, visualization is a key for the future, but shall we have drones flying and with people? And there is experiments, of course, going on. We've seen it on YouTube, but how far can we go in visualization?
Things change, but not that radically. Okay, so it is important to think that, I mean, we're not going to have people flying in drones before we solve the problem of energy density. So we're not going to have flying drones before we have like good quality electric vehicles at available prices and different sizes and so on and so forth. So if you think 30 years back, things were different, but not that different. We didn't have metro in Copenhagen, we didn't have the bridge, but now we have those things, but other things are very similar to how they were 30 years ago. So let's remind us that in 30 years, things can change, but that they don't change like completely in a science fiction kind of way. And second, what a lot of the literature on sustainability transitions show time after time is that incumbents like Nokia, I mean, the big companies, the big actors sitting in the dominant, in the central role of the dominant systems, they are unable to see the alternatives because they are too invested in their own designs and running their own system. So one thing is to look outside what car makers and institutions that operate and administrate car traffic and public transport as we conceive it today do. So, for instance, all cities have been experimenting with other types of small electric vehicles, e-scooters, pedelecs, and the general discourse is that these are things that are difficult to deal with in the current transport system. But they are actually socio-technical experiments that are creating valuable knowledge in terms of user preferences, in terms of technical possibilities. Even the crisis, the COVID crisis has many cities like Berlin and Bogota and many other cities in the world have produced temporal bike roads for having this kind of transportation that respects social distancing. And many cities like Milan have decided to make those temporal preference bike roads permanent, okay? So there's a lot of this experimenting outside the incumbents that is important to study, to support, and to encourage.
Thank you very much, Andres Valderrama and Morten Elle from Ålborgs University for a very interesting presentation. We will now turn our focus to another topic, but related, and it will be about marketing of sustainable transport. And this presentation will be given by Alfred Andersson, who is a PhD student at Lunds University, Department for Transportation and Roads, and also affiliated with K2. And he is conducting his research on soft measures and their effects on sustainability transition. So please, Alfred, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, John. And thank you very much, Andres and Morten, for this very interesting presentation. I guess I'm now going to go a little bit more narrow, at least in terms of transport policy making. But yeah, it's very related, I think. But first of all, do you see my presentation as it should?
We can see and hear you.
Thank you. Okay. Let me just close the video there. Okay, so marketing and sustainable transport. My name is Alfred, and yeah, I'm a PhD student, and my research is about the effects of soft measures, and by soft measures, which is a very broad concept. We usually talk about mobility management and interventions that aim to persuade people to change travel behavior and use more active forms of transport or public transport. And I said I was evaluating the effects of interventions, and in this case, I've been looking at marketing messages and how the use of these are affecting the motivation to decrease private car use within different segments. So, marketing sustainable transport, as I said, it's usually part of soft measures or mobility management packages, and the aim is to influence travel behavior and or attitudes. And some studies have been conducted to measure the effect of such measures, often the packages, and seen potential to reduce car travel of around 10%. And especially you gain larger effects if you are targeting a certain group of people, like or an organization, for example, workplaces or schools. But also you could use these measures more strategically by targeting different segments that you know or think are more susceptible to the idea of decrease in private car use. Because the thing with soft measures is that you use them to persuade people that are already kind of open to the idea of switching. Because it's very, very hard. Research has shown it's very hard to change behavior within people that are not willing to. And you have behavior change theories where you try to measure the stages of behavior change, where you can see that when you are somewhere in the middle, like when you're in a bit ambivalent of the way you perform your behavior, you're more easy to persuade and make a change in the end. So these soft measures, they are rarely evaluated in isolation. As I said, they are most used as packages. For example, you can use them in combination, such as restricting parking. You could, at the same time, give more access to cycling, for example, and provide information about this campaign. And in such way, gain a larger effect than the interventions separately. But there have been some who had made an effort to evaluate these individually. And for example, Kans et al. Found that for PT, public transport schemes incorporating this information and rebranding and marketing campaigns typically achieved twice the level of patronage in their services. But it's still, I think, or from the literature, there's really no systematic research on what type of communication that works or how it affects different segments of the population, or what preconditions affect the motivation to decrease private car use. So this is has been the aim of this research. So I have divided it in 4 questions here. Firstly, what marketing messages are effective in creating motivation to reduce private car use, and how does it differ in segments? And by segments, I mean groups. Groups divided by, for example, travel behavior, but also attitudes towards traveling or the environment, and so on. And I will go into these two questions firstly, and then move on to more about motivation and what preconditions that influence motivation to reduce private car use, and how these preconditions, I will go into what I mean by this later, but how are these demographically distributed? And actually, I have seen this being asked a lot from the industry, especially public transport industry. How should we market our service to get the most effect? And we have been using an online panel targeting a random sample within Sweden, so not in Denmark, unfortunately. So there might be some cultural differences there, as John mentioned. But we have asked questions about demographics, travel behavior, attitudes, accessibility to modes, and so on. And then we have also tried these different marketing messages for sustainable transport, and how this in turn affect motivation to decrease private car use. And the most common frames, if you could call it that, for communication within transport is a gain framing, which is connected to saving money, for example, or that you gain some kind of health. But also you have some messages that is more about the benefit of others or for the environment. I haven't seen a lot of practical examples of status. Someone were mentioning status, the car is a status symbol, and so on. And we tried to measure this as well. So we were incorporating messages that convey the message about traveling sustainable is a symbol of status. But we found it very hard to actually to get a good message on this one. But let's move forward. So yeah, and after collecting this data, we used some different statistical techniques to find some relations. And I will begin with talking a bit about the segments. I will not go into any detail because it would take too long for much long time. But I can say that the segmentation we used is a already available segmentation method that was constructed within an EU project a couple of years ago, where they found 8 segments. You can see them here, where you have their travel behavior, but also attitudes towards what I said earlier, traveling and the environment, so on. And they all differ in some ways. But you can see from this diagram, this is the modal split of the segments. The gray is the car use. So the amount of people in each segment, or the percentage of individuals in each segment riding a certain mode to work. So it is a working population. And yep, the travel behaviors differs quite substantially. Yellow is public transport, green bicycling and walking, and so on. So it was quite interesting to dig into these segments and also see how they responded to these messages. So, as I said earlier, the 2 first questions we asked was, what marketing messages are effective in creating motivation to reduce private car use, and how does it look in different segments? So first of all, we used 20 different messages, and we didn't see the value of measuring each message and draw tries to draw some general conclusions from that. So we used something called factor analysis to determine some underlying factors within these messages, which then become the base for several messages. And in this analysis, we found two. The first one we call self-efficacy, which is defined as the belief in one's capabilities to organize and execute the course of action required to manage prospective situations. And typically, self-efficacy is linked to more kind of extrinsic motivation, gain, benefits, money, and so on, and less pro-environmental behavior, as found in the literature. Contrary, the other factor we found or identified, I should say, is collective efficacy, which is defined as a group's shared belief in its conjoint capabilities to organize and execute the courses of action required to produce given levels of attainments. And this kind of dimension is generally more linked to inner values or intrinsic motivation for doing certain behavior, more altruistic and more pro-environmental behavior. So the messages were grouped accordingly, and the content of these two factors are presented here. And where you can see what in the table, and we start on the left one, you can see here what kind of content the messages had that was associated with a self-efficacy factor. And this was typically personal finances. Let's say that you save money by riding public transport and selling a car or something like that. Health, personal health, from riding more bikes. Status, prestige, using sustainable transport, and also convenience. So we could see that these were the main characteristic of this factor. And on the other hand, we had a collective efficacy factor where the messages were more about the environment, health, both personal but also health of others, like by not using car, I'm not polluting and therefore not spreading local pollution to other people. It was also more about morality. I should behave in a certain way because it's morally logic. And also in collective, I have a shared collective responsibility for certain things to behave in a certain way. So first we actually called the left one here, we call this egoistic factor and this altruistic factor. But when we published our results and they were under review, we had a reviewer who was strongly opposing egoism and altruism. So we had to rethink, but I think actually in the end that these two describe it better, especially how the marketing messages was formulated. So were they formulated as to you as an individual to do something for your own benefit, or were they formulated to you as an individual to do something with others or for others? All right, so let's move forward. We then measured these two factors together with the general motivation. We call it total. We measured the motivation from these factors in the segments which you have here on the horizontal axis, and the level of motivation here from 1 to 5. And here we can first of all see, or you can't see it, but we found significant differences for all segments between these factors, but also between the segments in how they answered. So in general, more car-dependent segments showed lower motivation. which is quite expected. But you could also see that some car-dependent segments had high motivation, and which points to the need for segmentation and targeting, and the value of actually identifying certain groups that do behave in a way that we want to change and are actually also open for it. So we, as I said, we saw some assimilation bias, which you can say is something which exists when something are interpreted based on preconditions. So you might see a message, two people might see a message, and they will think of it completely differently based on the preconditions they have, both in terms of behavior, current behavior, but also attitudes. And this is also an example of the difference between segments. Some segments are highly motivated despite relatively high car use. In the back here, you have the travel behavior I showed earlier, and the level of car use here. So if we would think that habit is the best factor explaining motivation to reduce car use, then we should have seen a more linear relationship on the motivation as well. But as you can see, it's quite different. We have some segments who doesn't drive a lot of car today, but they want to in the future. And then we have, for example, these three segments that are driving quite a lot, quite substantially, but are still very, very motivated. So we now turn to motivation. So we were also able to perform a series of regression analysis to try to measure the relationship between certain variables connected to attitudes, to travel behavior, and demographics, and see how these influence motivation. And there we found, quite interestingly, climate morality, and that was measured as my responsibility to decrease how was it measured? The question was, I have a moral contribution to decrease my level of CO2 emissions, I think. So that was a statement. And those who had a high level of climate morality also had a very high level of motivation to decrease private car use, and vice versa. We also see we also saw an effect of habit, so there's still something to it. We saw more linked to attitudes. Those who think that the car needs to be decreased in some way, or restricted, I mean, in some way, they were also more motivated to decrease car use. Those who like cycling and those who saw it as healthy and competitive mode compared to a car were also more motivated. And but we also saw that commuting time, so those who had a substantial commuting time on more than 60 minutes to work were far less motivated. So it's indeed important to I think, to separate rural areas and urban areas, and I guess this comes into the narratives as well, that we should construct narratives for both residential types. So, and how were these distributed demographically? So by doing this, we could see what segments or groups demographically are more susceptible or more motivated or have the best preconditions for being motivated to decrease private car use. And we saw that women, younger and older, compared to the middle-aged, people with higher education, and residents in larger and smaller cities compared to the rural areas, had more favorable preconditions, which is also something. I mean, these segments are quite typical within segmentation for soft measures. Yes. Yeah, I should also mention that as you, the model we used, or the variables we used, explained about 50% of variance. So of course there are other things that motivates people as well. These were just some variables. All right, so to the conclusions. We could say that collective efficacy and altruistic messages seem to be more motivating for all segments. And that segmentation, targeting, positioning can be a useful tool to make campaigns more efficient. And I think it should be used as far as possible, because it's also a question of resources to do these segmentations and targeting and so on. Personal norms matter. You could see that climate morality was the most important factor. But how do we make them more salient and more influensive in actual travel behavior? It's a question for further research. And then also, as found in many previous studies, there is a challenge to motivate the most dedicated car drivers to reduce private car use. And it might not be very fruitful for this kind of soft measures to work with this segment, actually. All right, thank you. That was my presentation.
Thank you very much, Alfred. And please use the chat function to ask your questions or provide your comments. Alfred, if you were supposed to provide one policy advice to municipalities or regions or other organizations in the Greater Copenhagen area, based on your research, what would that be?
I think that these green travel plans have a great potential, where you actually include a lot of different measures within the package and then target like an organization. You can target big companies with these measures, and as a policy, it might be a certain policy saying that you as an organization must implement these green travel plans and use them.
Okay, thank you. Johan, do we have anything from the chat?
Yes, we got one question. The last question from the last session from Chunli Sao maybe was answered by Alfred, but we got another one. Marie, she asked, have you investigated the relation between motivation and actual behavior in this study?
No, we haven't. It's a very relevant question, because in the end we want to change the behavior, right? But no, it would be very hard, we figure, to do these measurements of the cognitive perceptions of the marketing messages and see how it affects travel behavior. But what you can say from previous studies that have researched the relationship between attitudes, motivation, and behavior, there is a clear relationship. But the harder the behavior gets, the less stable the relationship. So for easier behaviors like changing your light bulb or something, it's high. a high relationship. For travel behavior, less.
And this is a Swedish study you have been doing. Is the same in Denmark? Is it some differences between Denmark and Sweden?
I don't know actually, because yes, like you say, it was within Sweden, and I found it quite interesting with the climate morality variable, in that the study was conducted in early 2018, which was actually before we had the fire hazards in Sweden, and when the Greta effect wasn't in full bloom, I think, at that time, and still you had this quite strong relationship. So I would guess that it's has gotten even more strong now.
And I think that was the question, the answer to the next question from Tuke, who asked the car use and the climate, the flygskam actions. So it was before this research was before the flygskam.
Yes.
Oh.
Yes.
And one question from Andres then, should car driving shaming campaign would be the one. Now, past Corona, what can we do? What should we do to get more people on going by public transport or bicycle instead of cars?
Well, I think it's important to acknowledge also that soft measures in communication can only do its bit in changing travel behaviors. You also need other types of policy instruments and changing the urban structure and so on. And then you would like to feed in this information and to make it even more effective. But I think it's there is a reason to keep fueling the debate around climate change and its relationship to car use, because in the end we want to achieve less climate emissions. So when you have actually seen in research studying pro-environmental behaviors, that when one adapts one type of behavior or attitude related to pro-environmental behavior, it also have a spillover effect on other behaviors as well. So I think you could use environment, but also other messages to in campaigns in general.
Okay. And, one last question about how many people were interviewed in this studies?
1,500.
And they were living in Sweden?
Yes, it was the whole of Sweden, a random sample of the whole of Sweden, except the absolutely most rural areas in northern Sweden, because they don't have access to public transport. So it would be meaningless to give them messages about public transport, for example.
Thank you very much, Alfred, for a very good presentation and interesting answers to these good questions, and very good that you are so active in asking questions. It makes it more interactive. So very, very many thanks for that. We will now have a 15-minute break. So please stretch your legs, bring a cup of coffee, or feed your cat, or whatever you want to do. And be back here in 15 minutes. See you back then. Welcome, welcome back, everyone. I hope you enjoyed a nice short break. It's time to get started again, and now we will listen to a presentation about modeling the potential of sustainable trips for Greater Copenhagen to 2050, and it relates to the first presentation we heard this morning. And now it's Andres Valderrama from Ålborgs University who will be participating again, together with Lydia Tsinso, research assistant at the Department for Planning at Ålborgs University. And Lydia is researching the use of GIS tools to model future mobility systems. Warm welcome, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, John, for the introduction. Just give me a second to share my screen. So, can you see my screen?
So we can both hear you, see you, and see your slides. So please.
Great. So, hi, I'm Lydia, and today I'm going to present the main insights of our work with Andres Valderrama about the potential of sustainable regional mobility. And after Andres and Morten's presentation about the need for a sustainable transport transition, as well as Alfred's presentation about how to market sustainable transport, we could say that this is a more quantitative analysis about the future with the use of GIS. Our work is divided into two main parts. The first is the visualization of the future network of Greater Copenhagen 2050. And the second part is a network analysis of commuting by bike and public transport. And it consists of three different parts: travel time modeling, model share, and commuters and cycling analysis. Concerning the comprehensive transport network we are going to present, the main difference of the future system is that we plan a transport system for means of transport other than cars. And here is two figures, also Andres presented in the first presentation, about the current and future model split for Greater Copenhagen. The left figure shows the current model split, while the right one presents the desired future model split for 2050 made by Trivector. And to explain a bit the figures, black color represents car usage, green public transport, and orange cycling and walk. Each column of the chart in the figure represents a geographical unit going from the left to the right, from the more urban and denser units to the outer areas. And we identified the main problems of the current transport system, which is, as we can see from the rates, really dependent on car usage, mainly in the outer areas, of course. There is a low share of public transport and a tendency of cycling rise, mainly in bigger cities. And here we have a short description of the focus areas of the future system of 2050, which is a need of cycling superhighways network, new public transport solution in outer areas, as well as future station and bus stops and a mobility network. So having in mind this analysis of the current and the future situation, how the future system of 2050 looks like, and this is a general view of Greater Copenhagen area. This map is a future image of a coherent and sustainable transport system for Greater Copenhagen. And it is a response to identification of current characteristics we should leave behind. As we can see in the maps, the solid lines, the blue one is for the regional superbus concept developed in Sweden as well as in Danish regions. The railway, the existing routes with a solid red line. With a dust red line is a railway suggested mainly for the connection between Helsingborg and Helsingborg. And with the orange solid line is presented the cycle superhighway network, the existing and planned, as well as with the dust line, our suggestion for a cycle superhighway network in region Zealand. So here we zoom in the horizon area where the main growth engines are located. And I have to take your attention to the coexistence of cycle network across the horizon connection from its dust line here, I don't know if it's really obvious, between Copenhagen and Malmö and Helsingborg and Helsingborg. So we claim that we should also integrate cycle infrastructure in the horizon connection. We also added the light rail line of 28 kilometers from Ishøy to Lyngby municipality, which is expected to run in 2025. And here is a zoom in the southern Zealand, where our suggestion for a regional cycle network is located, again with the orange dust line. I have to mention that the triangle between Slagelse, Ringsted, and Næstved was a proposal from some students of Ålborgs University. And generally, we could say that the plan for cycle superhighways is trying to work supplementary and be connected to public transport, as well as serve the areas where main connection is the car. Furthermore, there was a try to add touristic value to the new routes and be traced in streets which already have cycle infrastructure in order to upgrade it and be more cost effective. Moving to the second part of our analysis, it is a network analysis of commuting by bike and public transport. And it constitutes a justification for further development of sustainable modes of transport. Because although in this case we have an overview of the current infrastructure capacity, as you will see in the next maps, it is expected that with further investments, the accessibility will face an increase. So here is a map with the cities we consider as main points of interest in the regions. They were defined as start points to model their potential travel times with different means. For Denmark, the cities we chose are the one mentioned in Mobilitet Atlas and the one near main transport corridors. And for Sweden, our start points cities are the one mentioned in the Openscon 2030 as growth engines, as well as Halmstad from region Halland. I have to mention that as region Halland recently joined Greater Copenhagen, we don't have many data about the region. So about the travel time modeling from the network analysis, we did a network analysis in order to clarify which transport mode is more time and cost efficient within certain time limits. So we used a travel time platform algorithm where we inputted the departure points and selected the transportation type. In our case, is public transport, bike, and e-bike, represented by green, orange, and blue in the map. So we have the start point and the area covered by each mean of transport for trips under 15 minutes. Bike speed is calculated 20 kilometers per hour. And as e-bike was not an option, we calculated the corresponding time with an average speed of 25 kilometers per hour by using a linear progression known as the rule of 3. As we can see also from the diagram here about the area covered in square kilometers, bike would serve 6 times more area than public transport, when e-bike would serve sometimes 10 times more in average. And we run the same algorithm for trips under 30 minutes. And here is the result map. And although we can see that the difference between public transport and bike is slightly smaller than the previous map, again, bike and e-bike can serve larger areas than public transport. We have to mention that Copenhagen, Malmö, Lund, and Solrud present more efficient public transport connection than the other cities within this time context. And also we run for last time the algorithm for 125-minute trips, 45, sorry. And again, there is an important difference between areas to be served by bike and public transport. Here we see that Copenhagen is the only city where public transport is more efficient than ordinary bike, between 30 and 45 minutes transport. And Solrud follows closely with almost equal area covered by ordinary bike and public transport. And the general conclusion is that cities near main train corridors, like we see here, can be accessible faster with public transport. A general conclusion of this analysis could be that although, of course, car is more time efficient, in a long-term perspective, combined trips would be a competitive alternative to cars, especially in terms of resource minimization and not time minimization. So falling to the second part of the network analysis, model share constitutes one of Eurostat's sustainable development indicators and is presented as the effect of model split is of very considerable significance and is greatly influenced by transport policy decision. It is a justification of active transport and public transit as potential dynamic modes of transport. And here we have an analysis about the model split in Greater Copenhagen. In the left figure is presented the current distribution for each region of Greater Copenhagen and for 2018. And as we can see, car indicates high rates for every region, while public transport is surprisingly low and walk cycle are better developed, we can say. And based on that, the model split target of 2050 is a significant decrease of car users to 21% for the whole region, a need for increase in public transport to 41%, sometimes more than double from the current situation, as well as a slight increase in walker cycle to 38%. So here is a map of the model split for region Skåne. In a municipal level, we had more accurate data about region Skåne, and therefore we created this map about the current and the potential model share for 2050. And we can see it's a really detailed map, but we can see that most cities except Malmö and Lund, which already have a low car share, as we can see here, 34%, are expected to cut more than 50% in car usage, as we see for Helsingborg, for example. While public transport as well as cycling, walking will both face an increase up to 25%, depending on city size and existing infrastructure. The third part of our network analysis is an analysis about commuters and their cycling potential. And as sustainable transport modes constitutes a priority for Greater Copenhagen to achieve its sustainability goals, we created maps with potential commuters who travel to their workplace within 15 and 30 minutes in order to substantiate the potential for cycle superhighways development in every region of Greater Copenhagen. So here's a map about the potential commuters by bike in Greater Copenhagen, divided in regions. And taking into consideration the percentage of residents who commute less than 5 kilometers and between 5 and 10 kilometers, we projected the potential of cycling if ideally all of them use their bicycles to commute in a regional level. So we can see that except from region Zealand, the capital region and the region Skåne have an average of 30% for less than 15-minute trips and 55% for trips under 30 minutes. In the following map, for the capital region and Region Zealand is presented. Again, it's really detailed, but the main message is that about 20 to 40% of total commuters could cycle to work within 15 minutes, as we can see here. And while 30 to 70%, depending on the city again, we can see the difference from Ringsted to Copenhagen, would cycle to work within 30 minutes. And that leads to the conclusion that policies supporting cycle superhighways planning would be beneficial in terms of sustainability, cost efficiency, congestion reduction, and health benefits. We can see that there is a wide range of percentage rates within the defined time limits. So it is of great importance to plan the future cycle infrastructure by providing cycling opportunities to a relatively equal percentage of commuters who could cycle to their workplace within 15 or 30 minutes, regardless of city size or other factors. And here is a map with potential commuters for cities in region Skåne. In region Skåne is recorded a higher percentage of potential bike commuters, between 35 and 50%, than from Danish regions, that could cycle to work within 15 minutes, while this trend is rising for commuting trips within 30 minutes to between 45 and 70%, again, depending on city size and its infrastructure. The general conclusion is that an average of about 25% for the Danish regions and 40% for region Skåne could potentially commute within 15 minutes, while within 30 minutes, the average percentage rise up to 40 and 55% respectively. So here are the conclusions in my microscopic level. We can conclude that in short distances, that means trips less than 15 minutes, bike and e-bike are more efficient than public transport in terms of geographical coverage. In longer distances, that includes trips less than 30 and 45 minutes, a larger area is covered again by bike and e-bike, but the difference with the public transport decreases slightly. And we have to mention here that Copenhagen is the only city where public transport is a better option for distances between 30 and 45 minutes. So what should be done in a regional level to achieve sustainability targets of 2050? About the capital region of Denmark, it is expected to increase bike usage in 2050 with the development of cycle superhighways. There is a need for public transport to show an increase of about 25%, mainly in the suburbs, and car usage is expected to cut by 50% if there is still a desire for the country to become carbon neutral for 2050. Regarding Region Zealand, there is a need to increase bike usage in 2050, mainly in outer areas, and that could be done with a plan for cycle superhigh network there too, like the one we suggested. There is a low share of public transport usage, it's needed to be double or triple sometimes, and a need of a decline in car usage and substitution with public transport. And last but not least, about what to be done in Region Skåne. The bike usage is expected to be doubled from 2018 to 2050 in most cities of Region Skåne, except from Lund, Malmö, and Ystad, where cycling, walking as travel options are in a generally desired rates. Public transport in Region Skåne is expected to show an increase of about 10% in larger cities and 20% in smaller ones. And car usage is expected to be limited between 10% and 40% depending on the city. Here are the conclusions in a microscopic scale. We claim that investing in cycling would significantly increase access to jobs, education, and amenities in Greater Copenhagen. There is a need for further investment in regional level to the cycle network, which could potentially encourage about 30% of commuters to cycling within 15 minutes and about 50% within 30 minutes. It's a really high rate. And we also claim that combined trips would be a competitive alternative to cars in terms of resources, resilience, and sustainable transitions. Here are also the next steps we are working on. We are in the middle of calculating the new infrastructure of cycle superhighways to model travel time, speed, and the area which could be served depending on the new infrastructure. There is a need to process model split data for the Danish regions and region Holland, as well as a need to include region Holland with future transport plans, which we don't have now. So that is all I would like to present today. I don't know if Andres would like to add something to this.
I don't have anything to add. You did a great job, Lydia. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lydia, for this glimpse of the future of mobility and transportation in the Greater Copenhagen area. I do think we have some questions. Isn't that right, Johan?
Yeah, that's right. Some explanation about the regional superbus. What do you mean by that, Lydia?
It's a superbus concept which mainly serves interregional trips, not trips inside the city. So that's the general concept of superbus network for interregional mobility.
All right. One question from Peter about the superhighways, the bicycle superhighways. Are they longer? Is it an impression that they are longer and that's why people don't use the bicycle that much?
That's true, but maybe the solution to this is to combine the planning of cycle superhighways in connection to public transport in order for the commuters to change mean when it's needed. Change from cycling to public transport.
I want to add that the experience in the capital region shows some surprising results. For instance, the cycle superhighway to Förutom, which has a very good quality most of the way. It is wide enough and it's the surface is really good. Has shown that people in that route are willing to commute distances above 15 kilometers daily, which is higher than the average commute in the S-train network, which is 12 kilometers. So the point is that it is true. I mean, cycling has been a short range mode of transport because the infrastructure historically has been an infrastructure of inferior quality. But in the future, we could dream of having like this very good quality, wide superhighways, cycle superhighways where you can use your pedelec and cycle at 45, 50 kilometers per hour. And then the range and the potential of this mode of transport becomes bigger. That also depends on making visible the benefits of the health benefits, for instance, of having this type of infrastructure. The student group that Lydia referred to that did the analysis or design a super cycle highway network between 3 cities in the south of Sjælland region. Some of them are actually present, Victor and the others. Hi. And one of the things they did, for instance, was to think of this kind of infrastructure, not only in terms of commuting, but also in terms of free time trips and tourism trips. So that's another thing that I think it makes sense to do, and it's part, as I understand, of the plans in Skåne, at least to think of this infrastructure as an infrastructure that can provide different values and not only transport values.
Thank you, Anders. I think we got another question in the chat, Johan. We do have some time for that.
All right. Yeah, Marie is asking, what would it look like if you don't consider only areas that can be reached but the actual location of inhabitants and workplaces. Would the modes be different then?
You mean different from?
Right now, it's the analysis is comparing public transport, bikes and e-bikes, and how far you can bike. But if you compare where people live and where the workplaces are.
Yeah, I can answer that question. Yeah, the analysis we did with Lydia was taking the center of the cities as a proxy of a place that represents an attractive place for workplaces and education places. But definitely the next step would be to actually map in the region where are or could be in the future these centers of attraction, and then map like real model real access using different modes to these places. But we haven't had the resources to do that task yet.
And one another question from Jean. How would you say the results would differ in densification strategies and potential changes in land use were incorporated in the study?
Of course, the densification of a city plays a crucial role. And as we saw in denser cities, bike usage was in very desirable rates. So as denser the city gets, the more potential, there's a greater potential for cycling there. But in contrary, when the cities are in outer areas, they are more dependent on cars. So I think that the next step is to pursue the residents of rural areas to use also their bikes or e-bikes.
Yeah, and there, Jean, there's another challenge we have there, and it's because of these knowledge tools to value or monetize the value of some infrastructure are done still in relation to the existing paradigm. So Incentive, for instance, has made a cost-benefit analysis of future super cycle highways, and the results are they are very valuable. They have a high return on investment in denser areas, whereas in rural areas they would have a negative return on investment. And this is a paradox, because that relates to the fact that in denser areas space is more expensive, and therefore there's more competition for space. So this connection to land use and potential changes has also to do with the kind of prioritization we can make in the future system for the use of space, right? Because if otherwise we're going to carry on this, we're going to inherit this differentiated way of valuing, which is not just in terms of, I mean, it doesn't make justice in terms of the potential there is, especially if one takes into account like improved evaluations of climate change, pollution, and health.
Thank you, Andres. I think we still have time for one more question, and it's about tourism. I think, Johan, please.
Right. Do you think that we should also consider the paths those cycleways follow? Instead of making them run besides the roads and cars and trucks, should be designed for a pleasant trip and not only an efficient one?
Yeah, and the study of if I may, Lydia,
yeah,
the study of the experience with, for instance, green bicycle path in Copenhagen has shown that this provide several services, like speed in the mornings for commuters and a nicer trip back in the afternoon where they go at lower speeds. So that's one aspect to take into account. The experience with cycle superhighways in the capital region show that this connection with public transport is very important to offer different ways of combining bike and public transport. For example, many people are willing to take the longer 20, 30, even 40 kilometers bike trip in their way home after work. But in the morning, they would like to take the public transport and their bike in their way to work. So this connection between cycle superhighways and public transport, it's also very important to produce different combination, different possibilities of combination. I would say that in the future system, if it is what we want it to be, there's going to be less roads and therefore more opportunities to have combined green areas, public transport, and cycle superhighways in a way that produces more opportunities for these different values.
Okay, Lydia, did you want to add something?
I think Andres covered all the answer.
Good. Thank you very much, both Lydia and Andres from Ålborgs University. And we now turn our focus to the last presentation. And that will be about challenges and opportunities for cohesive traffic information and ticketing systems in the Greater Copenhagen region. And doing that presentation is Jean Ryan, who is a postdoc researcher at Lunds University, Department for Transportation and Roads, and also affiliated with K2. And she's doing research on accessibility issues from different perspectives. I don't know if also Anders Wretstrand, who will be participating, but I think so. And he is an associate professor at Lunds University, the same department, but nowadays, first and foremost, a strategist at Skånetrafiken, the public transport agency in Skåne, also affiliated with K2. So please, Jean and Anders, welcome, and the floor is yours.
Yep, thanks very much, John. I'll just share my screen. Yep, can you see the presentation?
We can see it, but you could make it full screen. It will be easier for us to see the pictures.
Mm-hmm. Okay. It is full screen as far as I can tell, but
but I think it's fine. We can hear you, we can see you, and we see the screens, but we also see the next slide coming up. So if you could do something about it, it would be good, but otherwise just continue.
Jean?
Yeah.
I think if you press bildskärmsinställningar at the top. There.
I think it's because I have the two computers on.
And just växla mellan.
Okay. Okay, now there's nothing.
Very good, Alfred, for the tip.
Okay, no.
Should we try to? Could you go back and just continue with the setup you have right now, or is it?
I'll just try again and see, because it's completely disappeared now. Okay, yeah. Is it okay now?
Now it's perfect. So
okay.
Please, Jean, go on.
Yeah. This is not my forte with this sharing screen thing. So I'm just going to present a study we've been working on the last number of months, Anders and I. It's about challenges and opportunities for cohesive traffic information and ticketing systems in Greater Copenhagen. And first of all, if we just look at some cross-border challenges when it comes to some broader issues, there are differences in languages, cultures, currencies, markets, labor market conditions, political visions and priorities, governance structures on different levels and in different contexts. And this is just to name but a few challenges. And these are some of the sources that one can look at to look further into these issues. So if we look at Greater Copenhagen as a cross-border region, it's often cited as exemplary in terms of cross-border cooperation. And this could be due to its long-term vision and historical context, which has been detailed in Hosper's 2006. And this could also be due to this very strong socio-political willingness that has meant that a huge amount of resources have been put into the development of infrastructure in the region. And labour market, housing and commuting opportunities have functioned as core drivers for this development. And tourism has also featured as a core driver as well. So some cross-border challenges in terms of transport systems. So if we look at the specific aspects of ticketing and traffic information, which is the focus for this work package. In terms of ticketing, fares, zones, formats, payment types, validity, ticket inspection, legibility, and different types of issues for different types of groups can arise as challenges. For traffic information, the sharing of traffic information, the different platforms, different information, different formats, the punctuality of the information, the usefulness of the information, and as well the particular difficulties when delays and/or disturbances arise in the systems. So challenges for Greater Copenhagen's cross-border transport system are much the same as those detailed just before. So from the passengers' perspective, so there was a study carried out by Opinion in May to June of 2019 and of people who travel across the Öresund Bridge, and they found that overall most people are generally quite satisfied. However, there are many solutions that appear to be quite illogical and confusing, both with respect to information and ticketing. And there are inconsistencies with travel guarantees, many different platforms with conflicting information. And there was a reliance on informal platforms, for instance, Facebook groups, so that people share between themselves. And there are different issues for different groups. For instance, commuters are well prepared to have backup plans, whereas day tourists are more cautious and tend to, for instance, buy tickets that exceed the requirements for their trip. So the research questions for this study. So first and foremost, what are the challenges and opportunities for developing more cohesive ticketing and traffic information systems? Whose challenges and opportunities are they? And how are they perceived by the different actors with different perspectives? So the methods. So first of all, we looked into the literature and tried to establish what are the key questions in order to inform our draft discussion guide for the study. And the discussion guide was then later tailored according to the different interviewees. Sampling took place in September to October 2019, and in early November 2019, potential interviewees were contacted. So in order to pull the different perspectives together, representatives from public transport providers, partnership organization which facilitates cooperation, national transport authorities, public transport passenger interest groups, a tourist organization, as well as a knowledge center and a transport ministry were all interviewed, or were all contacted and then interviewed on both sides of the Öresund. So the interviews, we carried out 12 semi-structured interviews with 15 interviewees, 6 in Danish and Swedish, 5 in Swedish and 1 in English. This was during the time period from November 2019 to January 2020. And in Denmark, interviews were carried out with a representative from DOT, representatives from DSB and Banedanmark, a representative from Wonderful Copenhagen, representative from Passagerarpulsen, from Movia, from DSB, Sales and Ticketing Department, and from the Ministry of Transport and Housing. And on the Swedish side, a representative from Trafikverket, from Skånetrafikens IT department, from Skånetrafikens pricing department, and from Resenärsforum were interviewed. And then what can be considered more in between, there was we carried out an interview with a representative from Öresundsinstitutet, which is the knowledge center for the region. So the approach and analysis as part of the study. So we adopted post-structuralist and hermeneutic perspectives in a reflexive methodology in order to approach these issues. So this in terms of the analysis of the this was facilitated as a basic thematic analysis at first, and then a more in-depth thematic analysis was carried out, and then a more in-depth detailed content analysis and the revision of thematic analysis based on these results. So the predominant themes, so there were 6 main themes which arose as part of this analysis, and they were a focus on the customer, the other side, or tidying up at home first, political challenges, back to basics, and the low-hanging fruits. So focus on the customer, what does this theme entail? So when looking at the material, there is quite an evident rhetoric of focusing on the customer, and this often materializes as a list of questions presented from the customer's perspective, in terms of what would the customer want, what would the customer like, what would suit the customer, and this was present in several of the interviews. However, this was a slightly fragmented narrative, as it seemed as though some people depicted the customer in one way and others in another, whereas some of the interviewees had a more nuanced perspective and talked a lot about the different segments of customers and how they have different needs and wants. There seemed to be some tensions between public transport providers claiming to have the customer as their main focus. However, the passenger representative groups seem to all but reject this. And this could be considered to be a form of clash between focusing on relations between and across organizations, and a lot of energy and investment put into these relations between and across organizations, and a clash between this and a focus on the customer. And this was also framed as limitations. Several interviewees kind of explained and expressed that they would maybe perhaps like to carry out some more ambitious plans, but that they're very limited in some of the ways in which they are organized. And there was an expressed focus on agility, effectiveness, and the interests of the respective organization. And this was particularly on the Danish side. And in Skåne, there was an emphasis on having their own app, and this was and control and closest to the customer were cited as the main reasons behind having their own app. And digitalization and simplification was emphasized quite a bit on the Danish side, and this was referred to by some interviewees as the simplification agenda. And this was considered to be something that is really desired by customers. So some illustrative quotations for this theme. So one representative from a public transport authority ticketing prices in Sweden: the aim is really that people should not need to be aware of, here is a border. You should be able to travel and get around regardless. And then a representative from a public transport provider in sales and ticketing in Denmark: in other words, it's difficult when you have one type of governance in Sweden, one type of governance in Denmark, and one that should be common. What are the best solutions for the customer, and that is what we are trying to play it by ear towards. And this kind of illustrates this perhaps clash between really wanting to do the best for the customer, yet having to kind of work with these different kinds of governance structures. So the other side, there appeared to be a somewhat apparent lack of communication or clarity or knowledge regarding what is happening on the other side. And this term was actually used by some of the interviewees. And this was particularly with respect to, for instance, changes to zones, train movements, for instance, where did the delay arise when it comes to traffic information. Planning is carried out separately on either side, but traffic and operations is managed in cooperation with one another. And this could be considered some form of mismatch in consistency. And then several interviewees emphasized that the other side is outside of the mandate. So if they don't really have a way of influencing anything going on there, then it's something that they can't necessarily dedicate a considerable amount of energy or time to. And then again, there was this we and they narrative, and several interviewees actually used this term as well as a way of kind of articulating what is going on between the different sides. And cooperation it was sometimes referred to as indirect and unofficial or voluntary and informal, something that, yes, there are there are some necessities and the ways in which they do have to cooperate, but then anything beyond that is kind of indirect and unofficial, or in some way voluntary and informal. So some illustrative quotations for this theme. I would say that we are quite divided. Skånetrafiken has developed its system. We haven't had anything to do with that. So we are involved in our own. That is what DSB offers. And then from a representative from the Swedish side, so we are now looking at how we can enter the DOT cooperation and enter the other cooperation forms that exist in Denmark, and this with respect to the Skånetrafiken now trafficking, or soon within the next number of years to be trafficking the line within Denmark. So the theme of tidying up at home first. So there was this quite apparent theme of the prioritization of issues within the respective regions in the first instance. And this was articulated as a sense of the regions having a lot to deal with in terms of ensuring cooperation between different organizations within the respective regions. This was particularly evident on the Danish side. And this was also related to ensuring cooperation between the regions within the respective countries. And that was apparent on both sides. And this seems to take an awful lot of focus and energy, and then one might wonder what is left then for cross-border concerns. And the different geographical areas applying to different actors also seem to bring about some kind of complications, and this was particularly evident on the Danish side. So representative from a partnership organization in Denmark, but I also have that requirement, and that's Zealand. But is it really the case that DOT, which is a cooperation partnership within Denmark, should cooperate with Sweden before one cooperates with Zealand? And a representative from public transport provider in Denmark, DSB is in the whole country and even outside of Denmark. The metro is just in Copenhagen, and we have the whole of Zealand. So in that respect, we are very different. We are also very different in our ownership structures. So some political challenges. So there was a sense of the regions and countries turning inwards, although this was referred to as a bigger trend in Europe and worldwide. The border controls introduced in 2015-2016 were at least initially very difficult for commuters, especially public transport users, and one interviewee emphasized their results on the effects for quality of life. And then some aspects are very politically difficult. For instance, internal issues affect the building of big infrastructure and the selection of different kinds of infrastructure going forward. And this theme was underscored by a recurring theme of we and they as well, a recurring narrative. And there was an apparent lack of explicit responsibility, for instance, the sharing of traffic information, although it was emphasized that opportunities exist. Could this be related to a lack of political willingness or a lack of perhaps awareness? So some illustrative quotations for this theme. For a representative from the Knowledge Center, it is such a sensitive area, politically speaking, with respect to domestic politics. And a representative for Public Transport Authority in Sweden, there is not enough attention from the national level in Sweden on cross-border travel. But if Greater Copenhagen can contribute, then we have something interesting in progress. So the theme of back to basics. Several interviews emphasized a distance from the problem. For instance, traffic information and delays that it seems as though often these things are managed from quite a distance, that it's somebody perhaps in Gothenburg managing the delays in Skåne. And this was not just emphasized by the passenger groups, but also by some of the people working on the ground with these issues. And then it was also questioned whether there's maybe too much automation and nobody on the ground. And a combined app was emphasized on the Danish side, that this would be desirable before prioritizing perhaps other major investments. And then wayfinding and legibility, this was also emphasized by several, and something that should be a focus, particularly for tourists. And then there was a sense of opportunities for basic elements, for instance, reliability and the maintenance of trains to be improved upon first before an overhaul of bigger infrastructure, before investments in larger projects. So then the low-hanging fruits was the final theme. And this was articulated as there not really being a need for an overhaul of the entire systems, but small changes can be made to the existing investments. And there were suggestions for common standards for traffic information, for instance, that the same information can be shared but in different formats. And then it was also emphasized that instead of a common system, a way of allowing the systems to effectively talk to each other would be sufficient, or even desirable in this case. And there was a sense of pride surrounding achievements and systems, and this was from all sides, but a sense of things perhaps going a bit too slowly. And then it seemed as though there was a sense of common systems not really being on the table, but more piecemeal, incremental developments being supported and possible. So the low-hanging fruit, some illustrative quotations. What do you need from us, and what do we need from you? So this was something that is kind of a way of saying it's quite simple. We just need to agree upon what we need to share and how we share it. And then from the Swedish side, if our choice of standards should be able to communicate and get this to join together, then I think we must allow for it to be different systems. So some preliminary conclusions from this study. It seems as though perhaps the different sides are moving further apart rather than closer together, but this is not due to a lack of will or engagement, but perhaps due to some external forces. And there again seemed to be a sense of greater importance for the Swedish side than for the Danish. And there was a emphasis on the prioritization of internal issues in the first instance, requiring a considerable amount of energy. And again, it can be questions what is left for then the cross-border cooperation. And that there are negotiations taking place on different levels. And then there was an emphasis on investments already made and why invest in new common or joint systems when these investments can be improved upon and worked with in order to allow them to work together. And the overriding impression was that most likely it will be the low-hanging fruit, these smaller incremental changes and agreements and common standards which would facilitate the development of more cohesive systems within the region. So some potential actions that we have discussed as an outcome of this study. Perhaps the formalization of the cooperation and coordination between actors on both sides of the Öresund, an allocation of explicit responsibility for cooperation and coordination at the respective organizations, and particularly, for instance, with respect to traffic information, and perhaps the establishment of an official user forum or panel incorporating people on both sides of the Öresund. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jean, for a very interesting presentation. And it seems like it sparked a lot of questions in the chat function. Isn't that so, Johan?
Yeah, right. We have a question about Helsinki and mass experience done over there. If it could be a help for designing an incorporated system in Greater Copenhagen, and the main lessons we can learn. I don't know if you have looked into Helsinki system.
I am vaguely aware of the mass experience in Finland. This is in relation to the apps which allow the combination of different modes, I gather. We haven't really looked at that with respect to the integration of the system in Greater Copenhagen, but several different kinds of apps have been suggested as ways of facilitating this kind of cohesion in the ticketing, and again back to the investments of the actors. They consider, with respect to the Reisekort and Reiseplaner in Denmark, and with respect to Skånetrafiken's app, that they have already invested considerable amounts of time and energy, and the users are already familiar with these solutions, that using different kinds of apps from external actors might not necessarily be the way to go.
May I follow up on that question to you, Jean? In your interviews, have the respondents raised the question of mobility as a service as sort of a window of opportunity to also integrate more the ticketing systems, not only between Sweden and Denmark, but also between different modes of transportation?
This didn't arise that, yeah, in a few interviews, but it wasn't an overriding theme. But there were 2 to 3 interviewees who emphasized this, and particularly one in particular emphasized that, you know, if we look at these electric scooters and then these shared solutions that can be, you just need one app for any city, then why is it not possible for us to make it cohesive in this region? Those kind of questions did arise, or the way that these different the different modes can work as a backup to these more spinal modes that we heard about earlier on in other presentations. That, for instance, the infrastructure of the railway can be supported by these smaller mobility solutions. These aspects were emphasized by some interviewees. Yes.
What are the legal obligations of the authorities to cooperate across borders, and how could this be improved? It's another question.
Yes. Do you want to answer that, Anders?
Well, the quick answer is I really don't know. I think it's a lot of, we see that a lot of things are happening sort of in an informal manner, and there's nobody who is mentioning that they have to stick to the rules. So I guess there might be some, but not that we are sort of very aware of.
And a last question, is there any investigation, attention, willingness to realize a bike superhighway across the Öresund Bridge? And in our project, we are looking into 2 more new connections, the Helsingborg-Helsingör connection and the Öresund Metro between Malmö and Copenhagen. That's included in our project, and that's the traffic charter talking about. And there is no willingness right now for a bikeway on the Öresund Bridge. There's no possibilities of building that, I know.
Okay, I think we got another question from Danielle.
Can we agree that one of the lessons from this great research is that the whole mobility system should be primarily people-centric designed, and so always prioritizing people's need and frustrations over economic and potential political interests?
Yeah, that is something that several of the interviewees emphasized, that they're striving for achieving this people-centric designed and prioritizing people's needs and frustrations, that they very much want to, or express this willingness to focus on these aspects, but then also said that they have limitations, they have a framework in which they work, and that it would be really nice to achieve everything they would like, but that there are these limitations. But yeah, in some way, maybe limiting the limitations would be a way of prioritizing this focus.
I agree. I mean, I think it's a matter of coming from both ways, both top down and from bottom up. And some of the sort of recommendations that we have are sort of also bottom up, so that we can establish sort of regional platforms and starting to because it all comes down to political priorities, so and budget restraints and slightly different ways of governance and complexity in Denmark and maybe simpler structure in Sweden, but well, I think we have to be humble, and especially in this way where we face this COVID-19, and this will affect our economies for some time now in the short run. So we should start to build some frameworks for collaboration, and then we'll see.
Okay, I can also add that in Sweden there was a public investigation published last week about an integrated ticketing system for public transport on a national scale in Sweden, because we don't have it in a national scale in Sweden. I'm not sure though if that report or government report also included a cross-border perspective, but I assume it didn't. But there is work going on in Sweden on this very topic. So with that said, I once again want to thank Jean and Anders from Lund University, KTU, and Skånetrafiken for a great presentation. And we are now coming to an end of this seminar. I would like to ask all our speakers today to unmute their videos so that we can see you all. And I would like to give you a small challenge now at the end to highlight one thing, one recommendation or one message that you want to convey to the audience. What should they bring with them from this seminar? What are the most important things that they should bring with them home, or if they are already home, bring with them to their jobs when they go back to their jobs in a couple of months' time or whenever it will be. So please, start your videos and unmute your mics. And who wants to start? Yes, Andres raises his hand. Please.
I want to connect to the last discussion in relation to Jan and Anna's presentation. And I think that this contrast between what public servants and experts believe that people need and what they are allowed to do in their organization is rooted in the fact that all our organizations work on a very weird efficiency rule, and it's to deliver a service with as little cost as possible within the organization. That's what creates fragmentation. There is no definition of level of service in terms of providing a coherent travel for passengers. So I think we should all think, how can my organization and my expertise contribute to generate a paradigm that is centered in providing a seamless travel for passengers and people.
Thank you. Who's next? Morten, please.
I've been thinking here, it has not been presented here, but back in 1926, there was a meeting in Copenhagen among traffic researchers discussing whether automobiles could play a role in future transport. And it was not very realistic that they would play a major role. And if you look at the picture in 1950, they still didn't play any essential role than being at the pictures sometimes and so on. It was only a toy for the rich people. Now we may see similar large transformation where new things are going to happen in mobility. And in 2050, I'm sure that the only change have not been that some fossil fuel cars have been replaced with non-fossil fuel cars. The future is quite different.
Thank you. Thought provocative. Who's next? Do we have someone from the Swedish side? Alfred, for example.
Okay. Well,
Well, from my presentation, I think you could say that encourage the use of more soft measures, but more strategically. I guess that's the major point, and target the right audience and not see it as a silver bullet for attracting car users.
Lydia, do you have something to add? I'm sure you do.
Yeah, I think that the main message of my presentation and together with Andres is that investing in cycling and combined trips for regional mobility could increase accessibility in Greater Copenhagen. And although it may seem a big step in the future, it is really crucial in order to meet the sustainability goals of 2050 to lead in this transition. And at the same time, the outcomes of the implementation until now in the capital region encourage this next step for sustainable regional mobility.
And what about you, Jean? What's your message to the audience?
Yeah, I agree with what was said before, and with what was emphasized in the chat, that it is necessary to look at the people and in some way look with both this bottom up and top down perspective, that there maybe is this opportunity to in some way influence the ways in which people consider or perceive their options and the ways in which they move. But then there is also this system in which they are confined, and it is about somehow breaking down these barriers that we have and that we've set up, and that we perhaps insist on having, and allowing the system to adapt to a more sustainable to a more sustainable development, in combination with focusing on what people want and what they need to carry out in their daily lives.
Thank you. Anders.
Yeah, I mean, one experience that I have from our study is that the use of forum in Denmark, passagerarpuls, and they seem to have a very clear role. I mean, they carry out surveys, and these surveys are actually sort of available and probably also used. But the Swedish passenger forum, Resenärsforum, they have a less clear role, and I think if we could sort of build on passagerarpulsen in order to establish this sort of a cross-border user forum, and that could be a great starting point. And also an observation is in this project is that, I mean, there are experts from both sides in this project, and we see consultants from Sweden working in Denmark, and consultants from Denmark working in Sweden. So there is really a knowledge exchange, and that's something to also to build on.
Thank you very much for all of your very wise and precise recommendations and messages. Before we end, and I will shortly give the floor to Joe for some final words from this seminar. But before I do that, I would like to give you some practical information. And that is that you can find the presentations from today's seminar on the web page of the project, and there is a LinkedIn project website which you can, it's in Swedish and Danish only, and you can find it by yeah, I think you will find it by searching within LinkedIn basically. But there is also a web page from the project on the internet. And I don't have the address in front of me, but I'm pretty sure you can Google it. That's always the easiest way. There will also be a survey made after this conference to kind of collect your feedback to what was discussed here today. So with those practical words, I would like to thank everyone involved. Rebecca, who has been assisting us with the technical parts. Johan, who has been moderating the Q&A and the chat function. And all the speakers for doing very precise and good presentations. And of course, all of you who has been participating and listening and being involved in the chat function, asking questions and also thinking about how these research results can be taken into a practical, into practice basically. So with those words, I would like to say thank you for participating, and I give the final word to Joe for summing up and concluding this seminar. Thank you.
Thank you, John, and thank you for taking us safely through this seminar. And it's nice that the camera's on, since I put a roll up in the middle of my apartment and I put on a shirt for the first time in God knows how long. But thank you again for everybody participating and for the nice presentations. I was just thinking when we asked the people giving presentations what could be summed up about this, I think on the behalf of the project we can say as well that the goal perhaps is a coherent transport system, but the way to get there is to get a more coherent planning, and we need to get a more coherent planning where authorities can plan together, but where we also look at the coherence between modes of transport and vision and status quo as it is now. But summing up the seminar today, it has been really nice to see the results from our university partners, and on the behalf of the project I would like to thank as well. And I think I can also say for my colleague Sandrina, who is responsible for the work package 2, that the studies related to this, especially the last one, has been really helpful. And Andres, Morten, and Lydia has been a great help for me during the work in work package 3 and a great inspiration. And lastly, I can just do a little commercial since we talked a lot about visualizations and videos in trying to talk about the future of mobility. We actually produced the video within the project that you can also find on this LinkedIn page, and we would really much appreciate to get your response on that one. And then I think I would just say thank you for participating. Have a nice day.